we are Uncertain Things, and we have Batya Ungar-Sargon joining us with her. Hey, once again, you're joining us right before your new book is about to be published.
Hey.
And if by right before, you mean like 6 months before, which was actually how soon before my first book you had me on. The first time I did Uncertain Things was the first interview I did about Bad News, my first book. And it was it's so funny because it felt very raw to me because it was the first time I went back then from talking about being interviewed about Jewish issues to being interviewed about my book, which was about the media. And Adam always jokes that my brain is like a car and there are only 4 seats in it. And I can only be interested in 4 things at a time. And then I get super obsessed with them, which is true. But it's funny that now we're talking because my next book is actually about class. And I was telling somebody the other day, it's like I fought so hard to get out of like the Jewish journalism ghetto and to be able to talk about things that were not just Jewish. But now, of course, with this news and this war breaking out, like I'm so consumed by it. And I'm thinking about it so much that I basically forgot that I had written this book that's coming out in April. All of which is to say thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be back with you guys. I love this podcast. I listen to it all the time and I love you both.
I think it's exciting because we are not probably going to talk about your book at all this time.
Right.
It gives us an excuse.
We'll have it to be continued. Exactly.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I do want to ask.
Back to the Jewish ghetto.
Back to the Jewish ghetto. I do want to ask a question first to kind of kick us off, because as listeners may know if they listened to the previous episode, the last episode was a conversation between Adam and technically me and Eli Lake. And that was fairly soon after the news of the Hamas attack. And it was a very raw conversation. And I think the aim of that conversation was catharsis for people that were hurt and angry. That was the aim of that conversation, its purpose. I kind of want to start first just understanding both where you are at in your emotional trajectory, but also your analytical trajectory, because I have a sense of where Adam was, so I could like to know where he's at now, and Batya, I'd like to know too you how your feelings and thoughts have evolved over the past, what is it, week and a half? How long has it been? Week?
You mean within the range of the past week, or how did this week change us and how we've changed in the week at all?
I want to know where you're at emotionally, because I want to be able to place you all in terms of what this conversation is going to be, because I need to understand, like, I guess from Adam as Israeli, Batya as Jewish American, what you're feeling and what you think needs to be said right now, because I want that to frame, for my understanding, how this conversation is going to go, if that makes sense.
So I'll just start because my answer is quick. I see my role and the best use of my bandwidth ever since the October 7th pogrom to be remembering things, remembering the details of what happened, remembering how people responded immediately to what happened, remembering how people shift their perspective on things in response to what happened. And I see this project of memory to be more than my passion for history, but rather as a moral and strategic imperative. And that's where I am. Whatever rage may underlie or accompany said effort is, ancillary. But my focus is I need to remember, record, and clarify everything that's happening and how people respond to it.
Okay. Batya.
Wait, that's so interesting. Can you say more about that? That's really like about that dichotomy and the interplay between the two and how it's showing up and how you're controlling it and controlling for it.
Dichotomy between
the emotional and the historical.
Oh, yeah. The emotional is me personally not feeling entitled to decrease my rage.
Okay.
And partly that is related to my memory efforts because rage for me is a fuel and focusing drug. But But the purpose of it is not to be enraged, because I don't want my rage to inform my actual intellectual analysis or to lead me down darker paths. But I do want it to underwrite my more important efforts, which is taking names.
You're standing in judgment, is what
so
you're saying.
There's a real intersection there between the emotional and the historical.
Mm-hmm. But again, which is more than historical for me now. I do see it as a moral and a strategic imperative. I think there's the moral, which comes to what happened to the people and memorializing, which is part of the effort. And something that Vanessa and I sometimes talk about, this general human project of memorializing and how to do it right and why are we doing this. But there's also the strategic dimension, which is this is a clarifying moment regarding who thinks what truly about where they are in the world and what kind of politics they're trying to enforce, actuate. And I think when you have a faction that sees a Holocaust and responds by obfuscation, equivocation at best, and celebration and glorification at worst, it's clarifying. And it's important to not forget this, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. So you know who you're dealing with next time around when you're reporting on this, or not just about this, when you're writing about geopolitics, when you're writing about domestic politics. You need to remember where those people's minds are, what their actual moral infrastructure is, and how potentially in tension, to say the least, it is with mine. And tension is a very kind word to this, but I say I don't want to forget this. I don't want to fall prey to my own desire to be nuanced or my capacity to kind of rationalize or understand any and all perspectives, which is something that I do take pride in and I do love doing. But strategically, I need to remember that this is also how I can soften myself and pretend that I'm having a dialogue with people that are not really having a dialogue with me. That I'm pretending as if I'm having a conversation based on the liberal pluralistic assumption of fair-minded discourse, of good faith attempts at enabling a vision of the world, of a shared life that we don't actually share. And as long as I get seduced by the assumption that we're having the same kind of conversation, all I do is undermine the world that I want to see, which is an actual liberal world. Because I'm giving too much space, too much credence, too much unwarranted slack to people who just truly believe, genuinely believe in undermining everything that I care about.
Yeah. I think we might get back to this question of who deserves slack and who doesn't, but I wanna let Batya respond to the question first.
I'm going to respond to it, but Vanessa, I'm also very curious what this is like for you, for somebody.
Why are you hijacking this podcast?
I think I'm worried about what I'm going to say, and I'm pushing it off.
You're deflecting.
Mm-hmm.
I am actually, though, very curious. I won't do it the whole time. But Vanessa, I am really curious what it's like to experience this as someone who's sort of adjacent to and surrounded by it, but maybe slightly one step removed from it. What your experience of this has been for the last 2 weeks?
I think it's a question of how much to be open and how much to be closed to what's happening with my friend group right now. Mm-hmm. Because I feel like I want to be open and empathetic and supportive, but I know that if I'm too open, I'm going to get swallowed up by all of the emotions that they're feeling. And I want to not just like for emotional protection, but I want to maintain some level of, if I can, intellectual clarity, which for me personally, it's hard for me to maintain when feeling like strong feelings of rage or whatever it might be. So I think it's been a balancing act of trying to be there and be aware of what's happening and not be too ignorant, but at the same time not be sucked into too much. I feel like I have a little bit of worry for my friends right now that they know too much and they're not necessarily protecting themselves. And I'm trying to protect myself so that hopefully I can still be supportive of what they're going through, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. It's hard to think of this as a journey because every day I learned something worse than I heard the day before. And the day has not gone by that I have not wept, screamed in rage. And I also find it very hard not to see the other side of things. And so I'm sort of, and in this case, that's like, it's, I'm not a person like who's by nature a morally certain person. But this has very much, I think this has changed like aspects of my personality in a big way that I was surprised by.
Like what?
Like a certain level of moral certainty that's, I think, in the past been sort of hard for me to achieve, maybe even especially on this topic, because I have deep connections on both sides of the conflict. I never thought I would be able to kill somebody, and now I think I would. If I met one of these like Hamas people, I feel like the best way to do it is just to tell you like a few of the things that have happened to me over the last few weeks. So one of them was, I have a very close friend who's a Holocaust survivor, and we've been sort of going through this together. She's been sort of reading all of the reports, and then, I would see her in shul and synagogue, and she would say to me, I read this report, this happened to me. I read that report, that happened to me. And she started telling me stories that she had never told anybody, like for 78 years, that were sort of coming up for her for the first time because Hamas had done that to these Israelis. And at some point 3 days ago, when I heard something, I said to her, Toby, I didn't tell her what it was, but I said to her, I heard something today that's worse than anything that I've ever read the Nazis doing. And she said to me, yeah, me too, because they didn't see us as human. And at some point, to want to cause a certain level of pain, you have to see the person as human. Like when you're thirsty for their pain, that is an acknowledgement of their humanity. But there were stories she told me that were just so incredibly similar. And it's just been, she's in a very emotional state. She's a very strong person. So I think that's been a really big part of it. And I do I think probably a lot of us vacillate between like grief and rage and grief and rage. And then also trying to be like an objective journalist. And I was asked to speak at a rally, and I didn't think that would be appropriate as a journalist. And I'm sure, Adam, you're going through something very similar, which is like, we can't really say that I'm being like totally honest here, but it's like, I don't know if I'm capable of being a good journalist on this. Like, I mean, obviously the entire American media press corps has like just completely lost it and are completely all in
on the bed.
Thank you. Yes. From that point of view, but in terms of like what it's not the case that like we are impartial on this, and so I said, I can't speak at this rally. Like I can't go that far. But then I went to the rally, and then one of the other speakers started saying things that were actually really upset me, like about Muslims. And I was so glad that I had said no, but also I was so glad to know that I have not actually like substantially changed in terms of my own views about how humans should be. And, so I found out about this. I was in synagogue. Obviously, all of my technology was off. I'm Orthodox. And at first, we were all like we didn't really believe it. I mean, there was just a level of denial where the reports were trickling in from people who like use tech on Shabbos. And we were sort of like, that can't be real. 40 hostages, that can't be real, right? Like how innocent we were, you know? And at some point I said to, we were sitting around with some women and I said to them, as soon as I turn on my phone, I have 3 very, very close friends who are Palestinian, one in the West Bank, one in Gaza, and one who lives here. I said, I'm 100% sure when I turn on my phone after Yontif, after the holiday, I'm going to have messages from them. And I didn't. And I was very surprised. And I actually ended up reaching out to them. The response was just so interesting to me. Like, I think that there's like, it's just like I feel very strongly like, Adam, what you were saying, that there are people now who are like just dead to me. Like, just, you're not like, no. But then also I feel really strongly that there are people I love deeply who are very wrong on this issue. And I don't care. I can't not love them because they are very wrong on this issue. And I'm very surprised at that as well. Like, I've never felt so strongly about something, but I've also never felt as strongly that I cannot allow my friendships and my connections with people who in good faith see this in a different way to suffer, because I truly believe that you can only convince people with love. And even today, I was feeling such disgust with like everything we're seeing, the Holocaust denial, the minimization, these people denying the report.
Baby head counting.
Exactly. Who are the equivalent of tearing down the signs of the kidnapped children, right? It's the same thing. Like the people, the journalists, quote unquote, out there on the hunt for Israeli wrongdoing at every level, right? Like the people who are trying to, it's just disgusting, right? But let's
be clear why this is disgusting. It's disgusting not because Israel is exempt from scrutiny. Nothing exempts Israel from scrutiny. And I think that when it comes to the American government, the repeated calls for restraint are good. Those are good calls. This is what an empire needs to do, to say, you have the leash, but still be careful, still follow international law. Fine.
I actually don't think that's fine, but we can talk about that after.
We can talk about this after, yes. And this is more a policy question, and I think it's a complicated one. What's not complicated is that the journalists, I'm tired of scare quotes, but the scumbags who are employed by reputable news organization, who the minute news started coming out about the slaughter in southern Israel, didn't spend a second reflecting on what this might mean, and immediately scurried around to find any excuse to flip the moral equation so that Israel is either responsible for the attack, or at least they can equivocate that Israel's retaliation for the attack was so much worse,
right,
that we can excuse ourselves for not feeling bad about the dead Jews 2 weeks ago. Let's find any flaw, any hole in the reports streaming out of Israel about the magnitude of the savagery that took place there. You said 40 beheaded babies. We only saw pictures of one, and we're not sure if it was beheaded before or after it was burnt. So, basically moral equivalence. You said that a woman was raped? I don't know. Only the IDF, the government of Israel, and a few witnesses who seem to be a little angry at Gaza have accounted for the rape. How can I be sure? Oh, you're sending a forensic report about 9 women of different ages whose pelvises were broken? How do I know that it's rape? Those people are not dead to me, by the way. They are very much alive.
The voodoo dolls in Adam's room.
Memory that this kind of low-life Holocaust, it's not Holocaust denial. It's Holocaust apology.
Justification. It's justification. Yeah, they're retrofitting.
In the most prominent American media, exists in the most prominent avenues of American leftist activism, that those people are real. They also exist on the right, because that's where some Nazis have always crowded. But those people are real in prominent, reputable institutions.
Yeah. And unlike Batya, who's having this emotional response and questioning her own ability to be objective, there's no questioning among these people, right? It feels like they are either so committed to the narrative that it doesn't register, or I don't know, like they just feel right. It seems, at least from my interpretation, I'm not feeling any moral equivalence coming from those types.
Yeah.
No, because they're not journalists. That's Batya and I torture ourselves because we really do care about trying to understand what's going on. And I think we have a lot of cachet of credit when it comes to criticizing fucking Israel. It's not, we are not Hasbara people. And even today, even now, I think Israel has a lot of responsibility first for the attack, but also generally Israeli government right now. And there's a lot of legitimate criticism to lob at Israel more systemically when it comes to the past 20 years, at least. But that just has nothing to do with it. Because as journalists, we are holding these multiple truths, and they're not even in tension. They're just the reality of a really morally complex world. But what isn't complex for me and Batya is that the targeted slaughter of civilians is the definition of evil. If evil has a definition, it is that. And any attempt to defend it or to somehow smoothen the edges of the horror or make it something that is
justifiable, supposedly
morally acceptable because it is in the name of a resistance is reprehensible, period.
Well put. I do want to say there are people who are journalists who I disagree with their analysis, but I still love and respect and admire.
Many. There are many.
I want to just give a shout out to two of them. Zed Jalani and Li Fang are two of the best journalists I know. I don't agree with them on this issue, but I love and respect and admire them because I think that they are coming at this from a truly honest place that has simply led them to a different conclusion. And I just feel that it is so important to maintain these relationships. I mean, I have a Palestinian friend who we just call each other and just cry. I mean, we just have nothing to say. And at some point he said to me, we're both morally outraged at the moral equivalence, but from opposite sides. And we are, and that is true. And there are people who will tweet what he tweets, and I feel murderous rage. And then I'll see him tweet out, think, I know he wants me to be safe and protected and does not have an anti-Semitic bone in his body and wants all peoples to be equal. And then I don't feel murderous rage. I think, okay, that is another point of view. And I would promote it. I would publish it. But where that leaves me is in this quandary. And I'm curious if you guys have this as well, to where when I'm speaking, I feel like I have this choice where I can do my best, the grace of God, to give voice to the most articulate version of the feelings I'm having and the thoughts I'm having so that the people who agree with me can feel that relief you get when you hear somebody say what you think in the perfect way. But that would involve speaking in a way that betrays my own emotions, or I could try to control my emotions and imagine myself addressing myself to people who disagree with me, who I could potentially convince. And those are two extremely different versions of, I mean, it's the same text, right? It's the same, but it's a very different delivery. It's a different packaging. And I feel deeply, deeply torn between those two things, and between which is the which is the moral one to do, which is my call, like which am I being called to do at this moment? It's just very hard to know, especially knowing how much comfort Israelis get when you go on the mainstream media here and you make the case that is like so obvious, but somehow so hard for American journalists to wrap their heads around because they're so inculcated in woke mind virus that they literally can't tell right from wrong.
I have to go back a step. First of all, in crediting people that we often disagree with but are remarkable, and I deeply respect. One of my favorites in the Middle East context is Arash Azizi.
Oh, he's wonderful.
He is amazing.
He's wonderful.
When it comes to the question of a ceasefire, I think we greatly disagree, but I trust his analysis. But
and by the way, are these folks that you mentioned, are they Americans or Palestinians or Israelis? Like what's their...
Arash, I think, is originally Iranian.
I think he's Iranian, yeah. Zed and Lee are both American. Zed's Muslim.
In the case of trusting people, I don't think I have it in me to trust people because I know them. I trust them based on what they're saying and how they reach to a divergent perspective than mine when it comes to Israel. Mm-hmm. With Arash, his view of a ceasefire comes from a deep commitment to democratic liberalism and the minimization of harm to civilians. I disagree with his way to get there. I think his analysis, even by his standards, is flawed. But in everything that he's written and said publicly, I don't know what he feels in his heart, and I don't care. But everything that he has decided to put out publicly clearly shows a consistent commitment to these principles. When the attack on the Al-Ahli hospital, I hope I pronounced it correctly. Sorry, not the attack. When the explosion in the Al-Ahli hospital took place, Arash jumped to conclude, with some caveats in his writing and his tweeting, that Israel was at fault and bought into implicitly the Hamas propaganda about 500 dead and an Israeli airstrike that never happened. That probably never happened. But immediately as contradictory reports came out, not only did he rescind his original tweet, he also made sure to say, I was irresponsible to jump to that conclusion. That was my own biases or my own assumption. I respected that so deeply. And I think that is the acknowledgement of I am trying to stand for something. And whether or not I come at it from a Muslim perspective, an Israeli perspective, a Jewish perspective, a Palestinian or Iranian perspective, my core principle is seeing a world that is predominantly pluralistic, democratic, liberal, where civilians have the freedom to live their lives free from tyranny. That's not what I can say about most of the journalists and activists that have been covering this event that I'm critical of. They are not consistently landing at an anti-Israel perspective because of their commitment to a liberal Middle East. They arrive there because their loyalty is to a framework of good and evil, a framework of power that is exclusively, I don't know if you want to call it Marxist, not to offend anybody in this conversation, but that definitely draws a lot from the Marxist principle of power differential as easily reducible into a simple category of the oppressor and the oppressed, and B, using that as the only font to draw moral judgment. And once you buy into this ideology, if you want to call it woke, if you want to call it a critical bullshit, post-colonialism, whatever word you want to ascribe to it, once this is how you see the world, you are buying into a Manichaean good versus evil, David versus Goliath paradigm that has nothing to do with democracy, that has nothing to do with liberalism, and that can tolerate the most horrendous atrocities as long as they're done in its name by the right player, by the right party in this equation. I have no respect for that. And I don't think love is the way to bridge that. If this is your worldview, this is a philosophy. This is a moral position. And I can respect it as that. This is what you truly believe in. And you've shown me that you truly believe that once you've watched videos of women being dragged to the back of their car, to the back of a pickup truck, beaten, almost dead, potentially raped. And your logic, having spent years saying believe all women and defending Me Too, critical gender theory, and all this crap, you look at these videos and say, Israel had it coming. You're not dead to me. You are my enemy.
Oof. I mean, but Batya was talking about people that she knew and loved before.
My point is my personal empathy doesn't come into this.
Even if it is somebody that you knew and loved, and if they said something that you consider abhorrent, like that.
And love doesn't factor into this. This is about how I understand their worldview. This is how I understand them as moral creatures. And let me just be clear. I'm not talking about Palestinians. Certainly not talking about the citizens of Gaza, who I've said a million times might be the people in the most tragic position in current history. I'm talking about the journalists. I'm talking about the intellectuals. I'm talking about the people who give philosophical cover to a death cult. Those are the people that are not dead to me, but very much alive. Those are the people I consider my enemies.
Oof.
I can still have conversations with them potentially about other things. I can have coffee with them.
Why would that's a lot to unpack. You would have coffee, but you would have coffee with somebody who you consider your enemy.
Yeah. Why not? If they're interesting. Why? Maybe they have insight about other things in the world. Maybe I want to understand them better. Why not have coffee with them?
Guys, the next iteration of Uncertain Things should be called Coffee with My Enemy. Just be Adam getting coffee with each of these deplorables, one after the other.
Yeah, but that's my point. That I have no.
It would do well on social media.
I am not emotionally
right
reactive to those people. They don't offend me emotionally. That's the change. I'm offended emotionally when I see people who I think or assume are both intelligent and seemingly share my baseline moral assumptions about the world, being seduced by terrible ideas, especially when I think it's because of some knot that they got stuck on in their own head that they're not willing to critically examine. That's the sort of thing that gets me angry and frustrated. But when I see somebody so clearly communicating to me what they believe in, telling me in so many words, I am your enemy, I almost respect that. I can say now, okay, now we can have coffee, because I know that when it comes to this fundamental civilizational question of how the world should be ordered, what's a good society, we are on the literal opposite. I don't mind having a coffee with a Nazi, with an actual Nazi. They might be really interesting. I might learn things from them, but I'll have no emotional reaction to it because I know who they are. I don't have any strain about thinking, why can't I get you to see the world the way I do? I know why, because you're a Nazi. It makes it easier for me to have an interesting, cold, intellectual conversation with them over coffee. But they are my enemies.
I feel extremely grateful that there are people who I love and respect and admire who are saying things I disagree with so I can hear them, because if it's only the people who I now consider to be Holocaust deniers, I will become lazy and weak and morally self-righteous and stupid and wrong and unable to convince. And I think every time I see one of their tweets, I think, maybe when I tweet something, they're feeling the way I do right now, which is that's not my position, but I love and respect and admire that person who said that. And so I can no longer say like everyone who thinks that position wants all Palestinian civilians to be blown up, because I know that Batya thinks this and I know she doesn't think that. And I think that's I think most of the people on that side are basically worthless and worth writing off, especially the journalists. I literally, like you, Adam, I want to spit when I say that word because they're just so disgusting. No matter how much people hate journalists, they don't hate them enough. Like they do not hate them enough. But I still feel that there's, like to save a life is to save the world, right? And I know that I feel that I am being saved in my credibility with myself by being able to be exposed to those views and to be humbled by the gap between us. And I'm actually relieved that I feel this way, because I would have thought to myself I would have predicted that this was kind of a woke way to think, like, oh, I have privilege in this situation, blah, blah. I have to hear from the subaltern, yada, yada. No. I think to me, it's just like, this is what it means to be a good journalist, is to be humble about, even when you're the most certain, like find a person you can love and respect and admire who you can use as a barometer for your own humanity. And I don't know, maybe an Israeli hearing this would be like, that's so unacceptable and you should be ashamed of yourself.
I think there are two different parameters here. As a journalist, I agree with you. And I will, and this is because I also respect my craft, unlike we need to find a better word for them, or at least to separate what we see as journalism and what they do. But precisely in order to maintain this distinction between the craft that we see as the role of a reporter, of somebody who's trying to encompass the world and perspectives and give different ideas their proper, honest voice and hearing. And I think for that craft, for sure, you still need to do this. But that doesn't change my moral perspective about who are my enemies. If we were writing in 1938, I would still need somebody from Germany to give me the Nazi perspective, and I would still.
No. But we're like agreeing. You feel the way that I'm describing about Arash. Like you don't agree with him, but you are glad.
No. But this is the distinction, because Arash is by no means my enemy. I disagree with him.
Right. So we're describing the same thing. Yeah.
But that distinction, because I'm saying even with the people I think have crossed that line, I still want to understand what they're thinking. But I have a clear wall about whether or not we're in the same room having the same conversation. But I want to understand them in the same way that I want to understand Hamas. But with people like Arash and people that I respect, the reason we are having the same conversation is because we do have, it's not because of empathy. I don't know if Arash has any empathy for me. I don't know him personally. For me as an Israeli, I mean. But I certainly have empathy for Iran. I have a lot of empathy for Palestinians. But the terms under which we have this empathy is on a liberal understanding, a liberal conception of morality. And if we share that morality, then we're having a conversation.
But Adam, I don't have a liberal conception of morality. I have like an ancient Orthodox Jewish one. Like
which is arguably the origins. Tomer Persico will say this is the.
He's totally wrong. Like that's bullshit. No Orthodox person would agree with that.
But I mean, I feel like when my interpretation of Adam here, when he's saying liberal order, is maybe shorthand for pluralism and human rights and dignity, right? It's like, as long as you believe in the value of human life and that two humans have a right to coexist amongst each other, as long as their rights don't infringe upon the other, then, that for me, I think is what I'm interpreting when Adam says liberal world order. Like that's the fundamental baseline necessary for continued dialogue. If I'm interpreting Adam, you're right.
I'll take it. I still think that I think that
which I assume Batya agrees with.
I think she doesn't acknowledge how much she agrees with it, because I think the Jewish perception of life aligns very neatly and has evolved alongside the more recent development of the idea of liberalism. I don't believe in the simplified view of Judeo-Christian values. I think that's kind of nonsensical and ahistorical. But I think the current version of orthodoxy is very much 19th century, right? Like we have a view of religion and morality that has been evolved in diaspora and in relationship with other cultures, both Muslim and Christian primarily, and have evolved certain codes of de facto pluralism.
Okay.
Partly
I
based
need to
on
hear Batya's response to this.
partly based on ancient texts, but also partly in pragmatic relationship to being a minority and understanding the dynamic that you need in order to exist as a minority in a majority group.
Well, the Torah is very pluralistic. It's
philosophically, it is plural. I was just going to say also intellectually, there is a pluralism in terms of your ability to interpret the text.
No, I mean, the ancient text itself, there's room there for non-Jewish citizens who are not supposed to follow the law in the same way. It's very, very pluralistic. There's supposed to be many, many types of non-Jews who are supposed to follow their sort of 7 laws, which are the most obvious things, like don't steal, don't kill, don't eat from an animal that's still alive, kind of obvious stuff that the best part about the Bible is that God himself is subservient to the law. And it's something I try to explain to Christians. They have a really hard time with this. They think that the defining feature of Judaism is monotheism, but it's actually not, because monotheism is subservient to the law in Judaism.
You're right. We are a legalistic society.
We are a disputatious, legalistic
litigious society.
And I just don't think that the concept of human rights has any meaning, because a right.
You just described it. This was what you just described.
A right is a contract you make with a police force, with state violence. It's a contract you make with the people who have the monopoly on power. And
that's not the idea of human rights. Human rights emerge from the fantasy of a certain set of inalienable rights, right? That's the idea that those rights are something that is fundamental to the virtue of being human, of being alive.
Yeah, I don't believe that.
You don't believe it from the liberal perspective or from the Jewish perspective? Because it's definitely...
I don't believe it from the Jewish perspective, and I don't think that it's inherently objectively true. I think a right is a contract that the people who have the monopoly on state power make with the people who have, the right to oust them from power. And so it makes sense to have a civil right because you have a government that is answerable to you. But because there is no human government, there is no kind of I don't believe that they're inalienable, because there's literally nothing another human can't really take from you.
But if you take the metaphor of right literally, sure. But we're talking about a metaphor or a fantasy about what it is that we value. We're asserting through this metaphor of human rights what it is that is worth defending at all costs.
It's a liberal wish list.
Human value.
Yeah, so call it what it is. It's a liberal wish list.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
You know my point about believing in hypocrisies, that hypocrisies reaffirm your own fantasies about what lines should not be crossed and what versions of yourself you want to assert and validate. And I think that liberal wish list, if that's what you want to call them, is very much aligned in some places, not always, but very much aligned with some of the things in the Jewish wish list. I don't think anything is guaranteed by either God or by nature or by society. Everything is just what we maintain for ourselves because of the source of belief that we have. And the Jewish texts, at their best, for me, give you that space to kind of figure out and inquire what are those values that you want, that you think are worth protecting. And that's part of the disputations of the Talmud. And the liberal wish list is kind of like a more cheesy, tacky simplification of some of these conclusions, and sometimes in tensions with them, sure. But ultimately, they do come to an assertion of life, of some sense of autonomy, not complete, but some sense of autonomy, which is then translated into the Anglo-Saxon world as freedom or liberty, and some sense of civic responsibility. And all of these things, and pluralism, in a sense of protecting the right for others to exist around you without feeling threatened by their disagreements. And all those things, you want to call them Jewish, you want to call them liberal, or you want to call them wish lists, or you want to call them rights, that it doesn't matter. But it does show a shared foundation of what kind of vision of society we want to protect.
I think that individual nations and their nation states and their governments should arrive at what works for them, and they should negotiate that through years and years of elections and law, and sometimes war if need be. I don't need there to be some sort of abstract wish list that applies to all societies equally. I don't think that makes any sense, and I do think it's a fantasy, and I don't feel like I traffic in fantasies at that level. I have plenty of my own religious fantasies to occupy that part of my brain. But I don't feel the need to have something that I can hold up to people who are not American or not Jewish, or even Jewish but not Orthodox, and say, oh, I'm like you. I don't feel the need for that. I don't know that it's important. And I don't know that I think for the longest time, Israel has been a little maybe too worried about what the rest of the world thinks about it. And I think that was the best part of the Abraham Accords, was it really, to a certain degree, released Israel from that pressure, because once you had billions of dollars of UAE, bags of cash in the Israeli economy, it was never again going to be at the whims and mercies of, Western, exactly.
Wish lists.
And just getting back to the current situation, I could be totally wrong about this, but to me, I think a lot of people are saying that Bibi Netanyahu is sort of like delaying the ground incursion into Gaza because he's getting pressure from Biden. But I just don't think that is likely. First of all, Bibi never wants to do a ground incursion into Gaza. And of course, this is a very different situation, but I think it just the idea that that Bibi's little lectures about international law, which were repeated in the most disgusting way by Obama today on Twitter, just the most disgusting. We could talk about it, but the idea that Israel is in the same way has to actually pay attention to that seems to me to be fantastical. It's a completely different world thanks to President Trump. We're seeing right now in real time the failure of the language of human rights to guarantee Jews the right to self-defense and self-protection. And I don't think that that's an accident. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
I want to hear your point about this, because this is actually, Vanessa said we'll get back to it, and actually now is the time, because this is exactly our core, I guess, moral disagreement about this, which is really interesting, because I am not even convinced by what you're saying yet about how you judge things. Because how is empathy enough to understand, to be able to bridge a conversation with somebody who holds perspectives that are fundamentally in conflict with you, and I mean conflict in the existential sense, if you don't think that you share some sort of worldview? Because what does empathy mean at that point? Just empathy for you specifically, Batya, or for me specifically, Adam?
You introduced the word empathy. I didn't.
No. So my mistake. I misunderstood. So is it just a personal connection that allows for that bridge for you? Because for me, that personal connection would not be enough. If I don't feel like we have some shared grain or some overlap in the Venn diagram of our moral outlook I don't know how we can progress having this dialogue. To what end? If you believe in a death cult and in the extermination of people who are not, either because you see them as the boot that's forever on your neck, or because you see them as infidels.
Well, let me be clear. I don't have anybody in my life who
I know.
horrified by the.
I didn't think that for a second.
But I have someone in my life who has deep connections to Hamas through family.
Okay.
And I love him. I don't know what to do with it. I can't turn it off, and I don't think it would be good for me to. I don't think I should mourn the fact that I can't turn it off. And his mourning over our dead. Okay, I'm just going to be perfectly honest. It was much deeper than what I have been able to muster. for his. And I am not proud of that. But I'm not going to lie. So I'm the bad person. That's not nothing to me. And in the competition there, he's winning.
No, but he's winning. Not to intellectualize this, but I mean, I am going to intellectualize this. But this is my point. The reason that he's winning, the reason that we want to be more like that despite our deep affiliations and despite our own people being subjected to tragedy, wanting to be able to have this true willingness to show grief for the pain of our contingent enemies, which I'm separating from the journalistic enemies, but the people who just happen to be right now on the other side of the battlefield, is because of a shared commitment to the value of life. And that's what I mean. And you want whatever name you want to give it. That's not something that I think can be taken for granted. And this is the line that I draw. If you are somebody who has affiliations with Hamas, but recognizes that what happened, what Hamas has perpetrated, is an atrocity and a tragedy, and show grief, even if you don't feel it, but you feel that you're obligated to do that. That's the hypocrisy that I value. You're mastering your own sense of grievance in order to show respect to a higher value. And that higher value is human life, innocent human life. And you make it, and that is a noble stand, no matter where you come from.
I obviously believe in the value of human life. I mean, that's like the first thing you learn in the Torah is like that every man is created in God's image.
My point, though.
Well, I wouldn't call it a right because it's literally the easiest thing for someone to take away from you. I know, I wouldn't call it a right as a value of
sure. So ignore the stupid metaphor of rights that I have no respect for. Okay. I'm just using it, as Vanessa said, I'm using it as shorthand because it's available.
But my problem is that I do think it is an appalling moral equivalence to say that killing people the way Hamas did and the collateral damage of the war of Israel trying to prevent Hamas from ever being able to do that again is a horrific moral equivalence, that it is tantamount to supporting Hamas's actions.
I agree.
And so that to me is a very troubling thing that I realized. Like back in 2014, I was the person saying, look, Hamas lobs these rockets. They send everything they have and they kill maybe one or two, which is a tragedy. But then Israel retaliates and they kill 1,000, including 300 children. And that's just not acceptable. Like at some point, Israel has to say, that was me in 2014. Like the response is too much because they are their rockets are so crappy and their ability to hurt Israel is so limited and weak. That was me. And so I'm sitting here thinking to myself, like a lot of people would scream at me and call me like, whatever, an anti-Semite, whatever. Israel has a right to defend itself. And I would say, nope, but the Iron Dome is the defense against these rockets. Like it does not really need to kill all these people, especially because it doesn't really do much. This happens every 2 or 3 years. That was me in 2014. And I'm sitting here asking myself, like, were Hamas Nazis then and I was defending Nazis, but they were just like worse Nazis?
Unsuccessful Nazis.
Exactly, unsuccessful Nazis. Or did something change on their end that made this? But either way, like at this point, I don't feel that way anymore. I feel like to call for a ceasefire is to endorse Hamas's actions and to say I'm okay with them happening again. And I do mourn their dead. I do mourn the children. I do think that it's horrific because war is horrific, but I still think Israel needs to do it. And someone asked me recently, a friend, he said, how many civilian casualties, how much collateral damage will be too much for you that you'll say Israel needs to stop? And I don't know the answer to that. I know we certainly have not reached it. Plus, of course, all of the stupid hypocrisy like, oh, how are you going to get 1 million people to move in 24 hours? Well, it turns out 750,000 were able to, right? Like all of the, of course, it's complicated.
Probably could have been more if Hamas didn't try to stop them.
Of course. It's complicated by the question of the hostages. My God, like someone has to make that choice, right? About like, I mean, my God, right? But so clearly my commitment to human life is not absolute, right? Like, and I have to accept that. And I think that means I'm not actually a liberal in that sense anymore, because I do think that at some point, like, you can mourn the collateral damage and still think that the operation is not only morally justified, but morally necessary. And I think that's kind of where I'm at. But it's hard for me to hear myself saying this, and because I'm so not used to having this particular point of view, because, if human life is precious, then human life is infinitely precious, and no one is more innocent than anybody else. And yet I cannot arrive at any other conclusion than the one that I just did.
I think this is part of the problem. I have no strong perspectives on military strategy. My feckless ranting on this is still deeply rooted in this life value, liberalism, created by God's image, whatever metaphor you want. I love and hate all of those metaphors, because they all have some beautiful historical context, and they all are overused to the point of meaning too little. But whatever it is that we've almost come close to agreeing on, which I do think is a required shared value, does that preclude any kind of retaliation from Israel that can put civilian lives at risk? And I think this is where the difficult and honestly conversation that I'm totally ill-equipped to be having, but should be had between people like me with a little more knowledge, or like you and Arash Azizi, because I don't think you need to completely ignore your life asserting morality in order to allow for war. I don't think the ultimate conclusion of liberalism is pacifism.
Right.
And certainly is not total submission.
Well, but that's not
what does that mean?
liberalism. That's Judaism.
I am pretty sure that
somebody
within...
who comes to kill you, you have to kill them first.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you preempt them from killing you.
Jewish, but I'm pretty sure that within the liberal world order, the idea of
self-defense
is not anathema. It's not pacifism. It's not you. Liberalism does not, by definition, make you a vegan. You need to be
Thank
life.
God.
But my only admonition, my only concern in this is that if you completely abnegate any attempt to psychologically gesture towards protection of civilian life, then you have given up something fundamental about your own society. Then you have darkened yourself. And not to go all 2001 Bush years on you, but then the terrorists win.
Adam, I don't think you're a liberal. I think you're an Orthodox Jew.
Well, I don't know if you want to respond to that, but
I think a liberal is an Orthodox Jew that doesn't keep the Sabbath.
Interesting hot take. Okay, I do want to come back to the struggle that Batya has been having and the question that it brings up, which is like, who am I talking to right now? Who am I supposed to be reaching? And I just witnessing from what's going on in my own circles, what is the responsibility to try reach people? Who is reachable? I guess we kind of had this conversation with Yasha, Adam. It's like, who is reachable right now, and is it worth trying to reach them? I think is another way of putting Batya's conundrum. And I still maintain that it's worth trying to reach people, and people are reachable. But I'm also not, in the position of having to have done this 17,000 other times and to feel it with such a visceral way. And I don't know the answer to that. All I know is that I feel like you cannot wish for everyone to accelerate in their understanding at the same rate. And all we can do is keep trying to determine who's open genuinely to understand. And I hope that there's still people out there who are like that. And I assume there are. And there's people who are very confused right now who would like to have a conversation and feel like they can't touch this with a 12-foot pole. Because the minute you say anything, you're going to get attacked viscerally by whichever side you happen to be amongst.
Great.
And that's a problem.
No, that's great. Because unlike one of the many toxic, pernicious, nonsense beliefs of the left, silence is not violence. And you're allowed to not have an opinion about things. You're allowed to shut the fuck up. But if you're going to take your 6-foot pole, however long it was, and 5-foot pole, and wade into this conversation, either knowing nothing and finding yourself on the side of baby beheaders, or knowing a lot and finding yourself on the side of baby beheaders, you should be suffering the onslaught of angry people. This is you've earned it. I'm still very anti firings and things like that, because I think that's just again that's stupid retaliations. But if you're going to bring your ignorance to bear publicly, or if you're going to bring your cruelty and apology for atrocities publicly, I'm going to fight you, and I'm not going to be kind, and I'm not going to try to convince you that killing babies is a bad thing, whether or not they've been beheaded before or after. I have no respect for this perspective, or for the perspective of, oh, it's the condition, it's the underlying conditions that have led to them to behead babies. People have been victims throughout history without leading to them beheading babies. That is nonsense. That is the insanity, the lunacy that people on the left have bought into. There is no convincing people out of this lunacy. Batya?
Yes, although my husband recently reminded me that the Balkans happened just 30 years ago. Like, he was saying to me, like, where do you get the arrogance to think that humanity had progressed beyond, like, he's like, there's never been a war where women have not had their bellies cut open. Where did you get the arrogance to think we were past this as humans? I think what I would say is it's very interesting. I think the people who have the view that's represented in the media and on college campuses, that like basically this savagery, like you cannot call it out, because to call it out would be to exercise white privilege. And essentially you must be on the side of the powerless Palestinians, even the ones that are doing these heinous acts. I think that view is extremely marginal. It is way more marginal than it was in 2021. It's vastly more marginal than it was in 2014. And there's just so many people right now who are in the midst of going through the transition I went through in 2019, which is realizing like, oh God, like the left really, really hates Jews. And then you go, well, if they're wrong about Jews and they're wrong about Israel, like what are the chances that they're right about everything except kill the Jews, right? Like, what are the chances that they're like right about literally every other item and then accidentally wrong about this tiny thing? They're very low. The problem is it takes a very long time to get through that position. And so, my DMs right now are full of people who called me racist in 2019 for pointing out anti-Semitism on the left, denounced me publicly in the most horrific way. People who are friends who just utterly just denounced me to get a retweet from Linda Sarsour, who are now saying, oh my God, there's like a real problem here. And it's like, you think,
But what percentage of these contrite DMs comes from Jewish people?
Most of them. Yeah.
Right.
But I still think it's I'll tell you how in 2021, the second the war started, every stupid influencer and stupid, mindless, empty-headed, idiotic actor had stand with Palestine, whatever. This time, they all sat there waiting to see what Bella Hadid was going to say. God forbid she catch them not saying the right thing, but it took her a week to say something, and what she said was actually quite good. She was like mourning the victims, and mentioned Hamas's terrorist attack. So you could see after that, like they were like, oh God, like, oh, so I guess is it more complicated this time? And they started coming out with their like stupid false equivalencies, but at least they weren't supporting it. And so there was, I think the silence really spoke volumes. People were terrified to say the wrong thing, which they've never been before, is my point. right? This did not become stand with Hamas did not become the next Black Lives Matter or stand with Ukraine, right? It's kind of maybe a little bit, but it's still nowhere near, because we're still finding out about atrocities. It's just very, very different. And so I think the far left position is extremely marginal. The journalists doing it are simply beclowning themselves and showing themselves to be like the moral, like depravity that it is. But the problem is this. So someone asked me, do you think you could be a bridge to those people? And I can't, because it's like that scene in Monty Python when the guy says, I'd like to join your group. And they say, well, how much do you hate the Romans? And he says, a lot. And they go, right, you're in. And it's Trump. I mean, you have to say you hate Trump. But if you are a person like me whose hatred of Trump fell by the wayside because I realized they were wrong about everything and they were also wrong about that, so Barry Weiss can play that role because she's one of the people who really hates Trump, right? Like, she's still a solid liberal, like Adam, solidly committed to this idea of human rights and liberals.
European sense, not in the American sense.
And I'm just not there. So to me, it's like they're at the beginning of this journey, right? That I went through, for 5 years or whatever, 4 years, however long it's been, right? Where, I don't know what I am now, but it's a long journey because first you're like, oh God, they're just wrong about Jews. Maybe I could convince them about this. And then you're like, oh, wow, no, maybe the Greta Thunberg thing was really big, right? Like, it's like, she posts like, stand with Gaza, and immediately 15 million Jews probably went like, wow, is climate change a hoax? If you're going to ask people to choose between like their humanity and some like Democratic Party platform, it's going to take them a while, but at some point they're going to start to think. And I think this is a really big moment. Dom is laughing because he got...
No. I was laughing because it reminded me of the comment to Greta. Somebody who responded with a picture of her holding a sign, "I stand with plastic." In response to Greta Thunberg's picture posing with "I stand with Gaza."
And a little plushy octopus.
A little Jewy octopus.
Right. Which is currently
very, very angry behind her.
Which is currently sitting on Adam's shoulder because he received a plush octopus for his birthday this weekend.
It's very cute. Although it's smiling, and I believe hers was very angry.
Oh, no. He's frowny. He's frowning.
Oh, okay.
There's a little frowny face. Well, we know Batya has to get going.
Yes, Batya has more important duties. Batya, thank you. This was really difficult and interesting, and I really appreciate it. You are one of the... You are wrong about half of what you said, but we'll have to get to it another time. I really love having these arguments with you, Batya, and I'm saying this now, because I text it to you often, but I wanted on the record that it's clear that despite the how heated this is because how much I love and trust Batya to challenge me on these things, and sometimes, or I should say at some point in the future, maybe even change my mind about something.
It's completely mutual. I'm so honored to have you as a friend. It's so great to be here with you guys, and God bless.
What's the scoreboard in terms of how many times we've changed each other? Like I got inflation.
You got inflation.
I got inflation.
And you'll never let me live it down.
I never let you live it down. On police, you're right, and on Trump, you're wrong, and you will just never admit that I'm right about liberalism, but you know it deep down. You know it.
I think you met me 6 months too late to convince me about that.
No, I met you six months too late for the words to carry. You see, the trajectory of our lives. I've always hated the word liberalism because I hate any kind of attempt to group values. I even hate the word values. I think it's such a cheap word. But people have allowed themselves to become nihilistic because they have taken for granted so much of the beautiful world order that the liberal century has created for them. And taking it for granted, they allow themselves to slip into nihilism, tribalism, and blood feuds, and at the expense of that beautiful world.
Okay.
And in fighting this, I need to reassert those words that I used to hate so much.
I'm going to just give a little teaser to my book because it's actually relevant here.
Okay.
And you'll have me back on to talk about the book when it comes out. So the book is about whether working class Americans have a fair shot at the American dream. And what I did was for a year, I traveled around the country and did interviews with 50, 60, 70, I didn't count, like in working class people across the country. And to get a sense of what their lives are like, what their struggles are like, whether they feel that they have a shot at the American dream. And then also we would talk about politics as well, because I thought it was interesting. And one of the things that I found was just incredible levels of tolerance from these people, like just deeply, deeply tolerant people. None of them would have called themselves a liberal or said that they believe in liberalism, but they were deeply committed to the idea that like everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. And I think that they have become more tolerant as the country has become less liberal. A lot of their tolerance actually, a lot of them very, very openly would say, I voted for Trump because he was pro-gay. You know, and the real question is which came first, right? Like, did they become pro-gay? Did they become pro-gay because Trump was pro-gay, or did they really vote for him because they felt he was the first conservative pro-gay person? But I heard that a lot, and I heard from a lot of Christians who have a gay person in their life who they want to be treated with love and respect, and they would never, ever, ever vote for a Democrat. And so to me, like, what I saw was just so in tension with this idea that some sort of like enlightenment, ideal is the thing that brings tolerance. It was just much more like that the hard scrabble reality of life made them deeply tolerant for the struggles people go through and want to see people treated with dignity when they felt that they really struggled to get dignity. So food for thought for the next conversation.
Well, just to respond.
I know what he's going to say. It's like gays wouldn't have freedoms if it weren't for the liberal framework, right?
The hard scrabble of life in a certain historical context. It did not emerge out of nowhere. And also, it's not like the Enlightenment. That's why I don't care about the tags. It's not like the Enlightenment created something that is so that it's nothing magical. It's nothing mystical. It's nothing about the European blood that created this magic. No, but it's a set of historical beliefs and a certain tradition of pluralism that has allowed people to become increasingly more tolerant and desire and see tolerance in itself as a virtue. That is not obvious.
To be continued. Uncertain things. Thank you, Batya. Thank you for coming on.
Continues. Thank you for listening to Uncertain Things. We're at uncertain.substack.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us and share us with your friends and enemies. And if you want to support us, give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, stay sane.